And now I would like to invite Shri Souvik Bhattacharya, Associate Director, Integrated Policy Analysis Division, TERI, just a review of impact of government policies on the scrap market operation.
So, good morning. First of all, congratulations to IFA for organizing the 34th Annual Congress on a physical mode. In fact, we have been really bored organizing all this and attending all those virtual events. So, I think it's really great to see the industry people here. And thanks for the invitation and something which is very close to my heart and the work that we have been doing at TERI. I don't know how many of you are aware of TERI, so just kind of a small introduction about what TERI is. TERI is basically a think tank working on various aspects of sustainability across the world, across the oil and energy sector, oil and gas sector, the materials and the abiotic materials and biotic materials, which kind of I am looking at. And one of the core areas that we focus on is how we can promote integrated sustainability assessments, because most of the discussion around sustainability has been focused around CO2 emission, GHG emission, but we have never been able to really expand our thinking in terms of how we can bring every element of sustainability in the discussion that we are having today. Because since morning I am really excited to learn about the benefits, but possibly the discussion has been confined only to GHG. Why is it that we are trying to position this particular product by only saying that it is only able to reduce the benefits or in terms of the emission reduction? Why not the other benefits? How can we quantify that one and we can present a kind of a solid, sustainable and business case for the product for making the scrap industry as one of the most vibrant scrap industry in the world. So that's, with that note, I made a small presentation. I don't know how much justice I'll be able to make given the kind of paucity of time that I have. But yeah, so maybe if I can request to move to the next slide. Yeah, so just a kind of a context setting. I don't need to give this august audience the basis of or the justification in terms of why what the importance of induction route of steel making is. And if we look at the kind of savings that one has when it comes to producing steel from the secondary route, it's humongous. Particularly when we are talking about energy intensity and emission intensity reduction in the economy by 33 to 35% as per the revised NDCs. Steel through the secondary route is going to contribute in a big way in terms of achieving this emission intensity reduction. And I would say that we are really hopeful in terms of achieving the target, but I think we need to bank on that we would be able to achieve this target much before than what has been committed at the Paris Agreement. Now, what are the other benefits? So obviously we are talking about energy sovereignty. We are reducing coal imports. We have done some exercise to say that what kind of savings that we will have in terms of reducing our coking coal import as well as scrap import if we are able to really generate enough quantity of scrap domestically, particularly from the end of life, because largely most of the scrap that we see used in the induction furnace are the process scrap, not the end of life scrap. So it is important that we actually move from this process scrap or the intermediate scrap being generated in industries more towards the end of life. NDC target, as I have already mentioned, improving the trade balance. We are like really bad in terms of our the trade balance, which is quite in a negative side, and the depreciation of the Indian rupees in recent months is a clear indication in terms of how we are aggressively trying to improve our overall trade balance in the country. Social benefits in terms of the employment, I think the numbers have already been presented. Startups, we are talking about the Startup India. Can that be a kind of a contribution to the startup innovation within the country? And finally, bringing the venture capital and the private equity in this space, and more so in the form of impact investments. We are not in the era of talking about CSR, socially responsible investments, and ESG. There is a gradual transition, or I would say a disruptive transition happening globally in terms of bringing investors who are dedicatedly working on channelizing the resources towards investments that are going to really make impacts in the various sectors, particularly the manufacturing sector. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is a small exercise which we did, basically presents the kind of benefits. So there are two benefits, one from the trade perspective and the other one from the energy and the emission perspective. So you can see on the left hand side we have three major technology routes for steel production, the blast furnace route, the induction furnace route, and the electric arc furnace route. Although like they are kind of synonymous, but there are inherent challenges which we will see. So as you can see, it's a little dated data. So the baseline is for the 2018, and we see that around 49 to 50 million metric tons is coming from the blast furnace route. The remaining 50-60 route percent, or rather 50-60 million tons is coming from the induction furnace and the electric arc furnace. So if we look at, if this particular percentage share continue till 2030, then we will have around 118 to 120 million tons coming from the blast furnace route, around 77% from the 77 million tons from the induction furnace, and around 60 metric tons from the million tons from the electric arc furnace. But if you move to a scenario where we have the 30% of the steel coming from the electric arc furnace, so there is a kind of a transition in terms of where we reduce the blast furnace based steel production to 110, the induction furnace to 68, and the electric arc furnace to 76.5. We have also done an analysis in terms of how the benefit would be in terms of if we have higher percentage of induction furnace over the blast furnace. So maybe the next slide, please. So here you can see there are two benefits which are presented in terms of the emission reduction as well as the import benefit. So if I look at the table which is presented below, which is reducing the import expenditure. Now if we are able to move towards 100% scrap and we don't change the current price of import, then the kind of benefit in terms of both coke saving as well as your import cost of scrap would be in the range of 800 to 900 billion at the current prices. So you can think of the situation when we increase the scrap prices, because availability of scrap is coming to be a great challenge, because most of our scrap are imported from the developed countries. Although there is a ray of hope where the European Union is planning to shift their trade dependence with Russia and China to India, where the European Union Commission was here. In fact, some of the concerns that were raised in terms of the trade, we discussed. There were a set of parliamentarians from the European Union who visited us, and I personally raised this issue in terms of certain trade barriers that may come up and how that can be addressed, and I believe the Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of Steel is taking adequate attention to that one. I'm not going into the details of the numbers, because the presentation would be available to you all, and I would be available anytime in terms of saying this. But more importantly, what I'm trying to say is this is a conservative estimate. Think of the benefit in terms of we are helping in terms of reducing the dependence on mining activities, reducing the dependence on the transportation of iron ore, coal, dolomite from the mining locations to the place where it is being transported and generated and the steel is produced. We are charging, I think Maheshwari ji was referring to the use of scrap in the blast furnaces. The scrap being used in the blast furnace and that scrap used in the induction furnaces, there is a significant difference. How much that difference is? We need to create a case in terms of the incremental benefit of a scrap being charged in the blast furnace and the scrap charged in the induction furnace, and the wastage in terms of the energy that may arise because of the utilization of that particular scrap in a very different route. Next slide, please. Well, we do have three major policies in the country that are primarily facilitating scrap generation. The first one is the steel scrap recycling policy. It's a beautiful model, business model that has been proposed in the form of a hub and spoke model, where we have the aggregators who are basically providing it to the dismantling centers, and the dismantling centers basically providing it to the scrap generating centers. Challenges would be in terms of not really looking at scale. Yes, we would be looking at scale, but I don't see that's going to happen in the near future. It would be really challenging. I think the current business model in terms of having presence across different parts of the country and having customized induction furnace capacities is the way how we can at least go forward in the near term, because the domestic end of life scrap is not going to come overnight. So let that business model continue at least for some time. But unless and until we see some kind of complementary policies coming in the form of end of life vehicle, because end of life vehicle, say around we are getting 8,000 tons of steel. We estimate that it can be almost 22 to 25 million tons of steel that can come from end of life by 2025, 2026. So if we have to wait for that one, then possibly we need a further amendment in the end of life vehicle policies to see that how we are able to bring in more end of life vehicles to the various scrap recycling facilities in the country. Next slide, please. The ship recycling policy, and we have executed to the global convention, but we have not been able to really tap the kind of potential some of the other neighboring countries have been able to do it, which is the Bangladesh. Now, that's an area which we need to really focus on in terms of bringing more ships. And as we see kind of more global trade happening in the coming future, we would see more such kind of ships coming in, and that's where the government of India need to take a kind of very proactive role in terms of ensuring that how we can bring in more ships and dismantle in a sustainable manner as per the guidelines to ensure that there are quality scrap being produced and generated which are recycled, and more importantly the kind of quality targets that it need to meet to address some of the requirement in the industry specific application like the automotive sector. The vehicle scrappage policy is there. Obviously we have our concerns because the kind of vehicle that is reaching the end of life is not at all making sense. The kind of volume is being generated is very low. So the main problem is in terms of the coordination across possibly the complementarities in terms of the policies. We have not possibly looked at how each of these policies actually complement some of the achievements of the policies of the other. If we look at some of the vehicle scrappage policies, the kind of steel that is expected to be generated at this pace in which the policy is, possibly it may not be the kind of volume that we had initially expected. It's a truth. Although we may agree, we may not agree, that is a different thing. But it is going to happen that at least we do not have other adequate checks and balances to take care of the potential leakages that are happening in the sector, and particularly because of the presence of the informal sector. So that's something which we need to work on repeatedly to ensure that the products which are reaching the end of life are reaching the place where they are appropriately dismantled and it is being used in the various electric arc furnace or induction furnace industry. Next slide, please. Now, there are some inherent issues in terms of the inadequate scrap availability. I'm not going into it. The potential surge in the import of mixed metal scrap. So that's a kind of a policy issue that have been already identified, but we don't have the solutions to that one immediately. We do have the inadequate infrastructure in terms of the kind of scale up of the aggregators and the dismantlers that we are talking about. We don't have that infrastructure and adequate formal players to take this initiative in the future. And finally, the concerns of the quality that we have seen, particularly when it comes to the imported scrap through the ships. So the quality is an issue, availability is an issue, the infrastructure is an issue, and more importantly, in terms of the mix of the scrap, impacting the overall acceptability of the product in the market, the end product in the market. Next slide, please. Well, some of the other issues, including the informal sector, we have raised this issue in terms of why can't we give a kind of a formal status to the informal sector. It has been discussed at length at various interministerial discussions with the Niti Aayog, but possibly we have not been able to see the light of the day, largely because of the control and the monopoly that many of these players have at the local level. But challenges can be converted into opportunities. And what are those opportunities? Those opportunities lie in terms of really going in further, because that induction furnaces are one of the best advantage of the induction furnaces. It can be scaled down, up and low. Why can't we actually look at maybe further reduction in the scale of operations to really target some of the even lower players in the market to have the adequate quality of scrap, so that at least we start getting some kind of channelization in a better manner, if not at scale. And finally, the last slide for my presentation, if you can just go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so what's the way forward? The way forward is, first and foremost, is the life cycle thinking of the steel making process in the country. Because we have largely been talking around the steel making only from the process related aspects, not from an integrated perspective. So an integrated perspective will only help us give a kind of an understanding, the kind of benefits that, rather I would say the actual benefits that potentially the induction furnaces have over the tradition or the other steel making processes. So that is nowhere documented or undertaken in India. I haven't come across any such exercise where it really tells us in terms of the integrated benefit of the various steel making technologies in the country. The second thing is about the public procurement. If you look at Netherlands, they have come up with such a beautiful tool, a software, which will help them evaluate the environmental impacts of various products. And that particular environmental software is applicable to everybody. Everybody feed in the data, you get the data, you know how sustainable that particular product is, and you create a kind of a perfect pitch of that particular product to the government. We have been talking about sustainable public procurement for so many years, but nothing has actually moved in except in certain products and services. The third element is the formalization of the informal sector, which I have kind of already talked through, and the research and development. I think that's where the industry and the academia need to come together to play a very constructive role to make, particularly when it comes to making quality output, and which are in need with the expectations of the final users. And so let me end my presentation here, and I would be more than happy to discuss anything with you. Just before that, I would like to just mention that at TERI, we are doing, possibly for the first time, for all steel making process of the integrated assessments across including the green steel that we are talking about. So hopefully in the coming months that report would be available, and we would soon be in touch with you to share the findings. So thank you so much for this invitation, and all the best.